Daily Detroit is brought to you by the community. Support our work at patreon.com/dailydetroit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to your Daily Detroit, sharing what to know and where to go in Southeast Michigan. Welcome back from the weekend. It is Monday, September 22nd, 2025, coming to you from our studio at Tech Town. I am Jer Stays, and if you're a longtime listener of the show, you know that an ongoing topic that we like to cover is transit, transportation, and connecting our region together. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so glad to have a returning guest on who is celebrating an anniversary and an important thing that I think we should all talk about. Megan Owens, the Executive Director of Transportation Writers United. TRU is celebrating 25 years this week with a gala later this week on the 25th at the Bellagio Banquet Center in Dearborn Heights. We have a lot of topics to get through, but congratulations, 25.
Yes. It's pretty exciting to see, to look back at all of the people we've worked with, the progress we've made, and to take a moment to pause and celebrate. Sometimes it feels, we're certainly in some pretty rough times, so it is extra important to celebrate where you can.
So how long have you been with TRU?
Almost 20 years.
So there was a TRU before you.
There was,
okay,
absolutely.
So we're going to talk about some of the topics of the day around transit and things like that, but I want to get into this history a little bit. How did TRU get started? How did Transportation Writers United get started?
Yeah, it started with a number of Detroiters and people from around the region who were just fed up by how poor the transit was and how little attention or how ineffectual the elected leaders at the time were in resolving these. And it's really interesting to look back at the breadth of people who were involved. There was a 14-year-old kid who had had a chance to travel to New York and to Paris and had this incredible freedom on this transit, visiting these vibrant cities, and then came back and had to wait on his mom to take him anywhere around this region and said, hey, maybe there's a connection between good transit and vibrant cities. There were people who were concerned about air pollution from the highways, giving their kids asthma. There were people who just wanted their dang bus to show up on time. So this breadth of people started coming together and realized there was a whole lot of interest and launched the organization, starting in many ways trying to fight highway expansions and say, hey, maybe instead of spending billions to widen our highways, maybe if we brought some commuter trains back, that would be a more efficient and productive way, and even getting the transit agencies to work better together. So well, we've had some successes and some things we're still working on. The vision remains that everyone should be able to get where they need to go, regardless of whether they drive, and that transportation in our region should be an asset and shouldn't be hurting either people's health, their pocketbooks, or our planet.
So how did you get involved?
My career career's really been focused on nonprofit social change advocacy, trying to figure out what can I do in my little way to try to make the world a little bit better. I started from more of an environmental background. I had worked on issues of climate change and power plant pollution, and was ready to move from Ann Arbor to Detroit, and it was a great fit. So even though I started from an environmental background, I spent very little time focusing on the climate or air quality piece, even though those are really huge benefits of transit, but have really learned about and appreciate the economics both for individuals and for households and for economic development for the region and community development, and seeing how transit ties into so many different pieces of our lives and our society.
What do you think is, and there's different ways we can approach this, but what do you think is the biggest challenge that you have felt over being around this for 2 decades?
Probably, it depends on how broad or philosophical you want to get, but in some ways, one of the biggest challenges is a great phrase I heard recently of privilege bias. The vast majority of people who make decisions in our region drive, and everyone they know drives, and so they have a hard time getting their brain outside of transportation equals get in car and travel on roads and find a place to park. So that broad concept of getting people outside of this assumption that cars are the only way, even when people know with their brains, a third of people can't drive, that they know that there are seniors and that there are people with disabilities and that there are low-income workers and there are so many people who need those options. It's hard to get out of their daily experience. So it's one of the reasons we've been doing things like taking state legislative candidates and city and county officials just out on the bus. Come see just how normal and everyday this is and start moving towards this idea that transportation can be a whole wide range of ways to get around, and it can change trip to trip and day to day.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do things. And one of the things, if I may editorialize a bit myself, is I occasionally take the bus, and I've gotten texts from other journalists, other media people going, what? Wait, you don't just cover transit, like you use it? And it's this unbelievable thing. And I think it's so important for people to experience it so that they know the investments need to be made from a user perspective. And not everybody has lived in other cities or seen these different sorts of things. And I think about this too from the business community. You're talking about that privilege side. So many people who do business, even when they go to other areas, they're in the car or they're being driven. It's not something like in some areas where you go to Chicago and you see the train above you, right? And you hear the train. It becomes something that is just part of your environment. Here, it's almost like it can be where some people forget about it. Sometimes people forget just the high percentage of carless households we have in Detroit and Metro Detroit. We have a percentage that's in line with places that have lots of transit, yet we don't have it, right?
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of things that I think about as far as the not a handout, but a hand up, but also ways to turbocharge the economy. Like there's benefits across the board, no matter how you look at it.
Absolutely. And household expenditures. The average household in this region spends over a quarter of their entire household budget just on transportation. Whereas in communities that have great transit, that's more like 15%. So imagine if every household in this region could get a 10% raise just by, or cut their expenses by 10% just by being able to get around in different ways. And that's money that can be spent at local businesses and all of those things. I will say, when I look back at the accomplishments, obviously transit is not where we need it to be. It's certainly not where we've envisioned 25 years ago. But the attitude about transit has changed dramatically.
I wanted to ask you about that because I think it's important to celebrate these accomplishments, you know?
Yeah. One of the things, again, more philosophical or broad conceptual, is the general attitude towards transit. 25 years ago when True started, there seemed to be this attitude of transit. Who cares? Why bother? We're the Motor City. It was so foreign. And in my early years, the group had made some progress towards, well, sure, it'd be nice if we could have better transit, but it's never going to happen here. We're too sprawled. It's too late. The auto companies won't let us, whatever excuses. But at least over the last 5 or 10 years, that we've at least gotten to the right conversation. There's now a recognition, okay, this region is never going to be a world-class region, is never going to be attracting the best and brightest if we don't make this investment. So now at least the discussion is, how are we going to make this happen? How are we going to pay for it? Who's going to get it first? The debate has shifted, and I feel very proud that True has played a big part in helping change that perception of what's possible.
There have also been some wins over the years that are very tangible. You think about, maybe you can share this with the audience, how important the regional transit, the RTA, the Regional Transportation Authority is. And I'm going to ask you a little bit more about its future with somebody very important who talked about a little bit about the importance of the RTA. But getting that into place is a huge win and like a foundational step that I think the public doesn't realize it was very necessary.
Yeah, it was really interesting. When I first started, I tried to kind of diagnose where are the real barriers, what are the hiccups, and there was no single entity in charge of transit. The city was doing its thing with DDOT and the People Mover. SMART was doing its thing in some of the suburbs, but not others. There was no one actually looking comprehensively at what needed to be done and bringing these entities together. So one of our early accomplishments was legislatively getting the Regional Transit Authority created. So there is a central place and body and entity, not only to facilitate the federal and the state funding and apply for different grants, but they have been able to fill in some of the gaps, like things like the Detroit to Ann Arbor Airport Express, transit routes that cross borders and didn't really meaningfully exist before. So the RTA has been able to make some meaningful progress. So that's definitely one big accomplishment.
And although we don't have everything that has been on the drawing board, I would say that things like that airport bus, the D2A2, Detroit to Ann Arbor, both those things I don't think get enough publicity. But even though I don't think they get enough publicity, they've been seeing some success, even in their limited pilots, which honestly have been put together with shoestring budgets.
Yeah. These have definitely been shoestring budgets and yet are incredibly popular. Every time people ride them, they're like, oh my gosh, this is so easy. This is so convenient. Another piece that I don't think we necessarily gets enough attention is we're making real progress towards eliminating opt-out communities. This Swiss cheese approach of transit, the fact that we were able to, Oakland County used to be one of the major barriers to transit progress, and now we have true transit champions in the leadership, and we've eliminated opt-out communities. So places like Novi and Rochester and Wixom and Waterford that just a few short years ago, if you didn't drive, you couldn't go. Now people are able to not only get there for jobs that they couldn't access before, but seniors have way more opportunities. Seniors across Oakland County aren't trapped in their homes when they have to retire from driving. They can have a freedom and independence and flexibility. And we're pretty optimistic that we're going to expand transit throughout all Wayne County too. So filling in those gaps has been huge progress as well.
I'm thinking back to when I was at Mackinac a couple of years ago, and I want to remind listeners that transportation isn't just about buses or trains. In a lot of these communities, you think about how sprawled Metro Detroit is, which I'm sure is something that's got to be a challenge from a transportation perspective, but it looks different in different places. Like transportation also includes senior services, so that say your elderly uncle can get to places a lot easier and you don't always have to pick them up. And like those kinds of things that I think about that improve the quality of life, because listen, as we all get older, we know we have parents getting older, we have relatives getting older, and look, I love spending time with my family, but also people like the independence of being able to do something on their own, and that's dignity. And I think that is an important part of this piece too. It's a yes and.
Yes, absolutely. Now I think about a lady I met in Sterling Heights who's a small business owner, and a lot of people talk about the sandwich generation, people needing to take care of both kids and parents. She said she's the club sandwich generation. She was taking care of kids and a disabled uncle and her grandmother. And sure, she would make sure to take time off of work to take her grandma to the really critical appointments. But the everyday stuff, the fact that the smart paratransit could pick her uncle up or her grandma up and take them just to the regular appointments, she could actually run a small business and still make it through her day. So yeah, transit definitely impacts so many parts of our lives. And the other piece I wanted to mention, it's exciting to look at progress and accomplishments, but sometimes defensive work is the essential stuff. After the Great Recession, property taxes, property values have a huge impact on transit revenues. And SMART was looking right after the Great Recession, having to make massive cuts if they didn't increase their millage rate. And so we were able to run a campaign to say, hey, let's keep SMART rolling. Here's all the great things that it does. And even though Macomb County has always been a little bit hit or miss, after our campaign, they not only approved that millage, but they did it with 10% higher support than early polling had showed. So taking the time to talk with people about what this benefit is, and even if you don't personally use it, we all depend on people who depend on transit. So some of those defensive wins about making sure to keep DDOT functioning even before and through bankruptcy, and keeping the smart buses rolling even through huge economic crises. Some of those have been big accomplishments that I'm very proud True has been part of as well.
We fund transit in a lot of ways. Well, in the suburbs, it's through a property tax, and in the city, it's out of the general fund. But that's not always the case in like a lot of regions. Like we have to sort of admit as a region, sometimes we're doing things a little bit differently than a lot of other places. And it's part of why we sometimes get results we don't expect.
That is very true. The most major metropolitan regions have a dedicated regional sales tax. So not only residents, but also visitors are helping to pay for the services, the transit services that they're all benefiting from. Right now, our state constitution won't allow that, so we're stuck with property tax or general fund or such. But the other piece that I can't repeat enough is that we spend a third of what most major metro regions spend on our transit, and it shows. Even with incredibly hardworking transit agencies, incredibly creative planning and adjusting of schedules and all of those pieces, you can't make something out of nothing. And so definitely one of the things that we have to look forwards to is a more consistent, dedicated investment in transit that doesn't have to be voted on every 5 years and that does really bring in that broader scope of funding so that we can truly have that high quality transit system where people have the choices of getting around however they want.
This is my personal opinion, but I think about that transportation and transit should also be part of the roads discussion. Mm-hmm. I know it's very hot right now as we record this. We're on the eve of a possible state shutdown. And to me, anyway, I think that it all works together. I think that if you think roads are too crowded, maybe that's a place we could use transit to help alleviate drivers' needs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even if your reason for supporting transit is get those people off my highway.
But see, in functional regions, it all works together, right? It's all part and parcel. And I feel like we keep trying to like apply the hammer of more roads to everything when we could do a multitude of things that would be, good for commuters, good for transit riders, good for everybody. But we've got to see a vista beyond that. And I really, really applaud the work of Transportation Riders United, especially in that conversation changing part. I mean, I think about that you've got a major candidate for mayor who in one of their things said, hey, we need to encourage more transit, encourage more culture of transit, make sure it's more reliable. That's something that just wasn't a thing before. Absolutely.
It was very exciting when we held a candidate forum to hear all of these different candidates all making commitments to not only recognize that transit's important, but also looking at ways to really make that happen. And I do think you're right about the roads discussion, and it's not exactly new. 75 years ago, the urban legislators said, okay, yes, I understand we need to fund roads, but our communities have more needs than just roads. And so they made a decision that 90% of transportation revenue at the state level would go to roads and 10% would go to all the non-road modes, to the buses and the trains and the streetcars and the bike trails and the ferry boats that they depend on in northern Michigan. But over the last 25 years, several times the gas tax has been raised to increase funding for roads, or other funding for roads has been developed, and they've cut transit out of the equation. So we are very actively engaging with our legislators to remind them any new funding for our roads needs to invest, as you said, in the whole transportation system, needs to include 10% for roads. And unfortunately, the House proposal would put just 2% into transit. So again, that could be a whole nother conversation, but transit is funded at the local and regional and state and federal levels. And we've got and TRU's proud to have fought to fight at all of those different levels wherever we can to make sure transit is getting as much of the revenue as possible.
All right. So this happened late last week. I want to get your thoughts on this. Over at Crane's Homecoming, none other than Dan Gilbert, founder of Rocket, billionaire guy, throws his weight around politically in a lot of ways. I'm not being partisan in saying this. I think it's indubitable that Dan Gilbert has thrown his weight around through his companies, through his foundation, through other things around policy in our local area and the state. And here's the quote. Quote, I think we need a regional transportation system, a big bet that gets us from the east side to the west side and north to south to the airport, to Ann Arbor, and eventually to Chicago. Now that we have a regional transit authority, that's a big step that was taken the last couple of years. But I think the governor and mayor should have that in their top 2 or 3 agenda items when they take over, unquote. Okay, from an advocacy perspective, what could or would a big bet look like? And what do you hear when you see these words?
Well, I say, hell yeah, 100%. That's really exciting to recognize just how essential this is. And it is a critical election time this year and next. And it is critical that our state and city leaders recognize transit as super important. That said, we can find quotes like that going back from top leaders going back decades. The question is what they do about it.
I would mention when I was Googling to get this quote exactly right, there is a quote from September of last year that's almost the exact same in the same forum from him.
And 10 years ago and 12 years ago, in a way, I try to look glass half full and recognize we've got so many of the pieces right. We've got major business leaders. We've got elected leaders. We've got community residents and community organizations who very much want to see better transit happen. What I would ask is, Mr. Gilbert, let's talk. Let's figure out how we can come together to make this happen. This isn't something that any one entity or even any one sector can do. Unfortunately, one of the reasons we didn't pass the big measure in 2016 was that the business leaders kind of tried to do it on their own, said this is how we're going to pass this, and they didn't really listen much to the community voices. So one of the things that True is doing as we're launching into our next decade is really trying to bring together a statewide coalition of transit supporters, because we know so many people and groups care about this stuff. So working with not only environmental and disability groups, but hospitals and public health, labor, business, economic development, community development, education. Transit touches so many parts of our lives. So if we can really bring that broad coalition of voices together, we can make major change. We can double investment in transit. And while we do already have a train, Mr. Gilbert, we have a train there is a train between Detroit and Chicago. It certainly could run a heck of a lot more frequently, and we can have more and better transit connections. But this can't be something that just a few people make happen. We've got to really bring together the breadth of our region and the breadth of our state to make this transformational change.
Yeah, and there's a lot of voices in different cities, different counties, and different things that this is going to look like in those areas, and thinking, how is this all going to work together? You know, we have talked about change culturally in so many ways, and one person I'd like to flag in this is Dave Coulter.
Yes.
Oakland County Executive. What an amazing conversation I had with him up at Mackinac about a variety of issues. And then I'm also really glad to see, and this gets into my question going forward, you know, what are you most excited about? Because I know Wayne County has some things that they want to start rolling out or start getting into with Warren Evans. So what are you most excited about in the next few years or plans ahead? Lay us some tracks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yes, in the next year, the most exciting opportunity is to finally eliminate those opt-out communities, those no-go zones for transit riders. Places like Plymouth, Canton, Livonia, that right now, again, if you don't drive, you're out of luck.
I was there last night.
But what's exciting to see is there's a lot of community leaders and a lot of residents in those areas who say, yeah, it is definitely time. Maybe 30 years ago when this system was laid out, there may have been reasons to have each community decide for themselves. But when transit is on the ballot next summer, all of Wayne County is going to vote on transit together. And as you noted, for Oakland County, it'll be different in different communities. And that's fine. We don't all have to live in the same type of house. We don't all need to have the same type of transit, but every community has transit needs. And Wayne County leadership is working right now with SMART and with RTA to figure out what could that look like. If voters do decide to support it, how do we make sure every community in all of Wayne County has transit connections? And then looking beyond that, we talked before, we're working to double DDOT. There's no reason DDOT routes shouldn't be running every 10 minutes, so people don't have to wait a long time for their buses in Michigan's crazy weather. So over the next couple of years, working with the next mayor and council towards doubling DDOT service. Then, yeah, looking beyond, we do need to look again at a regional transit ballot measure. It's going to look different than 2016, but we need to figure out at the regional and at the state level, how are we going to make the investments to make sure everyone in our region truly has, and in our state, truly has choices for how to get around that are affordable, that are clean, that are reliable. That is not some crazy dream, but it is something that's going to take work and going to take a lot of folks coming together to make sure it actually happens.
In my personal opinion, I think it's the table stakes. It's required if we want to call Metro Detroit a competitive place and a world-class place. This is how we get there could be negotiated, but us getting there, I think, is a non-negotiable in my mind. And that's what I hear from listeners, especially young people who want to stay here, who want to do things, but it's real tempting to go someplace where things are easier.
Yeah, where if you're struggling to pay for your rent and your student loans, you don't also have to spend $1,000 a month on a car and insurance and all of those other insanities. So yeah, for so many different reasons, transit is essential. The region, including some of the top business leaders and many of the top elected officials, have recognized just how essential this is. Now let's come together and work through the hurdles, and we got to make some legislative changes, and we're going to have to figure out some investments, and because there's no such thing as a free ride, but we can make it happen. And I'm excited to help for True to be a part of making that happen, because heck, none of the things that we've done over the last 25 years, we've done alone. They've always been in partnership with so many different organizations and leaders. And that is the only way we're going to achieve great things moving forward.
Okay, as I mentioned at the top of the show, but in case people forgot, there is a gala coming up. Yes,
we're excited to host a 25th anniversary gala. It is a fundraiser to help us launch into the next decade, but we're excited to bring together the breadth of the transit community, certainly riders and supporters and partners we've worked with over the decades. Our original founders are going to be back in town to help celebrate. We've got leaders like Oakland County Commission Chair Dave Woodward, Deputy County Executive Assad Turfy, State Rep Jason Morgan. They're going to share their perspectives as well. We're going to celebrate the people, the partnerships, and the progress we've had so far as we launch into the next decade. So DetroitTransit.org, we still got a few tickets available, and we would love to have folks join us in this exciting celebration.
Well, Megan Owens, Executive Director at Transportation Riders United, thank you for coming back over to Daily Detroit. Let's stay in touch and keep things rolling forward.
Absolutely. Thanks for continuing the attention to this critical issue.
Well, that's it for today's Daily Detroit. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to our members on Patreon, patreon.com/Daily Detroit, because local media needs local support to survive and thrive. Also, if you've got feedback, dailydetroit@gmail.com. Yeah, tell me I'm wrong or tell me I'm pretty. I'm not sure which one. Probably not the last one. I have a face for podcasting. There's a reason I podcast. All right. Well, with that, I'm Jared Stays. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll talk tomorrow.